should start showing up, and then we're golden. Yes. Okay, good. Do you want to do the intro today? Go ahead.
I just spent the whole day pretty much um, bringing up my age-old blog site, updating it to latest stuff. Last I had worked on it was I had moved it to 11T because I wanted simple markdown to not seem like good enough markdown to good enough more text focused site. And then I've been try what I've been saying, right, that I want to get back to writing. So there was something very small happened at works. I've started working with these people because is the name of the project. And one of the things that we are currently doing is figuring out deployment plans. One of that was versioning strategy. And I was like, chalo, at least let me write whatever we decided there, because where it began was it started as a small tweet on Mastodon, trying to just write the format that I had decided. Then I needed to write another paragraph. Then I exceeded Mastodon's text limit. And okay, should I break it down into multiple posts? No, you know what? At this point, it makes sense to just write it in Markdown on that blasted site where I have not made updates in years and put it there. Then when I went to put it there, I first did it. It's connected to Vercel, so immediate deployment. And I log into Vercel and I see a bunch of build failures. Sorry, it did not go through. It got blocked. So I logged into Vercel and I saw build failures. And turned out it was set to Node.js 12. So Vercel has deprecated Node 12. So this entire day
Yeah,
was that
shitting.
thread.
Yeah,
And
nice.
then it was eta korochi tale, eta koriveli. Then might as well sit with the recording and start writing. Okay, now that I have written, might as well put it on the website. Okay, now that I've put it on the website, might as well do this. So that's what I was doing till 1758.
Actually, good, pretty good. আমারও মানে like so wait we're live so yeah I also have to do something very similar and huh, I I have written more. I started writing more amount of micro blogging frameworks than actually blogging.
Vlogging.
Every time I come up with this, like, this one doesn't suit me. I need to write something. So there are so many names. Flog. Uh, the last one was named Flog. And but yeah, I appreciate somebody at least putting things out there instead of just doing the uh, procrastination behind it.
Even it
That's what,
just took like 4 5 years.
yeah, only
But what I mean is today is a historic day, even if it is the only historic day for the next 4 years.
makes sense, makes sense. Right. So,
Sorry.
yeah. So I was thinking about what you said and kind of trying to build up the idea. So here's the thought. We have the right ideas, we do the right things, but don't like we get because we are too early to the party, we get lukewarm feedback about it and we don't stick around when the party actually kicks in. We kind of before that shit this sucks and I'm gonna go home and we just leave for home. That ends up happening. I don't have to explain that part, right? You agree that happens. Okay, so with that said,
Now, if we explain, it will be for the
I
audience and
see.
for
So,
record, like
yes,
FTR.
yeah. So I'll come back to the explanation part, like when those things happen. Applet is a good enough example. The AI revolution, the things that we predicted that okay, this is where things will go. These are the things we should build. That also includes like what do you call it? The online communication platforms, group phone and all, like very efficient, like adapting WebRTC, seeing the potential in it. So all those things we did it early, did it in advance, it actually struck a chord with people who cared, but not with the mass. It was not sustainable in that sense, that it wouldn't generate revenue immediately. But instead of sticking out with that, we kind of like, people just don't understand. Let's do something else that is fun and interesting. We kind of went through that loop of that. I was thinking that that might again be the case unless we are being mindful about it. And this is a platform where, first time in human history, people are actually having discussions or interactive way of communicating, just basically not just one to many kind of communication, which has been the entire history. Somebody tells you something and you do it. Instead of that, now the entire wait, I think my audio was still pretty screwed up. Um, okay, so now through those podcasts, audiobooks, and like they're not podcast audiobooks, podcasts, like the uh, comments in the video platforms, as well as the response videos like on TikTok and everything, there's like interactivity between where people are getting their information from and sharing it, bouncing it right back at them. And that is happening. That is actually huge from a potential perspective, as in from seeing a potential like what matters, right? First time somebody like marked something on a carved something on a rock, it was not something that you like, it was not profound, it was not probably something that you would frame it and put it on a wall, but it is something that you would frame it and put it on the wall for the sheer potential of transcending information through time. Similarly, the discussion platforms that are happening, that's like not one directional, bidirectional discussion that is happening, people communicating with the podcasters and stuff, that is going into a direction where I see a lot of people are setting up the base, creating that ecosystem, which we can leverage from and bring in the discussions that people are yet not having. We are having those discussions, and we also think that, oh, maybe people are not interested about it, or people are probably not going to understand it, or whatever that is. But instead of doing that, how about we give our best shot at making it available, and whatever happens happens. If we stick, my hypothesis is, if we stick around with that and spend a good enough amount of building the backlog of what are the things that we want to talk about, what are the things that we have at hand, and the practice of it, then at some point when people have discovered it, are coming along for the journey, we will have a solid repository of stuff to show, as well as solid grasp on the presentation of the topics as well, and we can take it somewhere. It can become more than what it is now. Just so okay, with that said, what are you thinking about this? Quick thought, it was just like I was thinking about half an hour before.
So this is a pattern that I anyway have found, and yeah, I totally agree that um, the challenge with our work hasn't been really that we don't have interesting things to work on, but I just want to cite two things. One is my experience this morning, what I just narrated, how I got into fixing the site. The only thing we need to do is look at something long enough. The way we trigger change, or we work. Sorry, that's like my cat's fur getting into the fans. Yeah. So um,
Making changes.
basically, the way we have worked is, if we look at something long enough, start seeing the cracks, start seeing the gaps in that, and then we would like to fix that. So this entire journey with applet has been exactly that. But the problem was that there were too many things to fix, and we were like falling through the rabbit hole, not hitting the bottom. By the time we hit the bottom, it kind of timed out. It was time to go home at that point, and many other things at the same time. But the point is, that bottom, that journey, when I look back at that, there is a certain deconstructionist uh, approach that I'm applying to that memory. That how did we go? Where did we go? It was as if the quest to where it landed on unicorn, really, which was kind of breaking down to a certain set of fundamentals. And I think that part is still valid as a area of research, as an area of now my whole face is covered with fur. Yeah, as an area of research. But the second thing here is that I have been already watching the last two videos that we have recorded, this being chapter 3 in this discussion, and I see us intentionally or unintentionally overlapping topics, like the same things that we had discussed last time that comes in through another area. So if I was to archive this, what I found was there is one, of course, a narrative of as we spoke in the order of things. But then if I blend that into like an encyclopedia or a knowledge base, so to say, by broad questions and topics, it turns out that we have a lot to say over time about the same thing. And aggregating that would be very interesting. So, what I want to do really is with these discussions, I want to pipe this through to first a like a speech to text engine, populate the basic, and I mean it's semi intelligent speech to text, not just basic Python speech to text, but that is where the AI part comes in to just if the link that I shared with you, I had only gone through chapter one, and as I kept on listening, I was like, I was also listening to last week's recording yesterday, and I was like, wait, where didn't we discuss on day two? And I'm watching day one, and then I went to day two, and it seemed like in day two we have discussed everything about the topic except the part that was touched on day one, with some just common bridges, which means there is value in creating this union of sets, and these topics are emerging. What I mean to say is that whatever we repeat, whatever bears repeating in our discussions is something that we want to get back to, and those should be the topics, which brings me back to that loop that I had said on the first chapter, uh, that if we are looping, then that is worth recording, and that itself then goes on to form broader discussions. So I totally agree in the sense that I think in the future, let's say when a year down the line, we could be looking at what we have done and trace it back to something like chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4 of the discussions to find uh, that pathway. So I think this is good. If we just follow where curiosity is leading at this point, I think it's naturally emerging in a very nice way. So when I say
Yeah,
curiosity, I mean whatever spark.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So in that sense, let's not rush into packaging it, and packaging it is in sense like uh, to make it something a brand or anything immediately. Let's go through that same process that we are doing right now. Some patterns will emerge. What you're talking about, like the horizontal and the vertical interpretation of the things, like we're talking about like having a chronological, okay, we talked about these things today, that thing to the day after. But also, if we look at from the perpendicular view, we talked about this part of this topic this day, and that part that day, and combine that as the topical discussion part. So I have a wiki deployment, if that helps, if you want to also like interpose as in um, what do you call it, like make it topical in that way order, that also can work that way.
Yeah, I think that is phase two anyway.
Okay, I see. um, cool. Where was I going with this? Hmm. So, uh, I was talking about how, where was I going with this? I think I had a thought and it vanished. It popped. Okay. Um, Forget it for the time being. I think I understand what you're saying. I agree. Let the pattern emerge naturally. Oh, the other part was about the speech to text part you talked about, right? Um, Text, speech to text, yes. So there are a couple of services. None of them are very cheap. cheap enough, as in, but it's
I
not
mean, I
free.
would measure it in my time, right?
Mm,
I mean, at this point, if I take 3 hours to get to a transcript, what is the cost of my 3 hours worth of work? I have a very
right,
clear idea.
right.
Is it cheaper than that? If
It
so, I'm
is.
willing to try.
It is. It costs in thousands of minutes, and it's not. It's gonna be $0.1 or something like that per session, ideally, something like that.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
anything under 15, 20
yeah,
is good enough.
yeah, exactly. So the better ones would be assembly AI, and second would be deepgram, and if we don't want all of that, if you just can run, um, do you have a GPU right now? Yes. So which one did you get? Did you get the Intel Arc, or did you get the
I have a
NVIDIA one?
4060.
Okay. So in that case, also it's a RTX GPU. You can run the models. So those server services are also running actually the Whisper, the OpenAI Whisper. So if you run OpenAI Whisper, the JAX version, um, so I'll send you the details, right? So in that case, you can just basically run it on your system and get the result. Not
Yeah,
much
so
about it
I
at all.
wanted to use the same opportunity to also learn at the same time.
Yeah.
The reason I created that space on my blog was I'm now like I want this to be filled in this format, except I don't want to be doing it.
Um,
I want to script help somebody do it. Uh, but there was another pattern that I noticed by watching the last two recordings, and that is compared to the last times we discussed this, there is a lot of higher order maturity in our thinking because we have spent more time, both you and I. Like earlier, what used to be vague jumps across the chasm, now they are like very well identified landing points and like we've traced. So, what I mean is that certain things are very well formed, and putting them together will probably be quicker than, let's say, it was last time. What I again want to do is make sure that those inflection points are captured.
I see.
It's very much like watching two like galaxies merge. It's kind of that dance. You know that it won't clash, it will just flow through
Yeah.
each other. The important thing is locking around that, like what you had said as twin stars
Yeah.
orbiting. I think it is looking like two galaxies currently merging and would then begin orbiting.
Right. So
That if
yeah. So last day we started talking about something. Do you want to continue with that, or do you have some other topics in mind? Okay. Let's try to go for that. By the way, I posted the link about the Whisper Jacks. So if you can run it on your system, I think you will get, for as in the transcriptions for free, essentially. Right? Cool. Um, yeah. So the I was I was trying to make a criticism about dialectics, as in the entire process of the dialectic process itself. I was not able to put a finger on exactly where my discomfort comes from, but finally I realized it from a concept called PID controllers. Did I expand on this? I didn't. Okay, so let me share my screen then. Uh, can you see it? I can't hear you, so you have to say yes or no. I
I can see, I can
Okay,
see.
right. Okay, fine. So this is a controller theory that is used pretty much everywhere there are you are trying to stick a landing, essentially, like, frankly speaking. That includes the previous attempt of landing the Chandrayaan 2, essentially, the rover. Uh, so point being, there are three aspects to that control theory. One is the proportionality control, second is the integral control, and third is the derivative control. What do they do? Um, the the like, I'm not going to the maths part of it, just keeping it very straightforward and like the like visual interpretive. That's so. If you are trying to get somewhere, the intent of going there is, let's say, higher when you are not there, further away from that position, the set point you are. So let's say, for example, this is your initial position, this blue marker is your set point where you want to go. Further away you are, the more intention that you have to get there. But as closer you go, you have less and less intensity to get there, because if you keep that intensity, you will cross over, right? You will just shoot through. So you have to reduce that proportionally. That's the proportionality part. You can identify that as an echo chamber. This is the thesis part. Now, there's a drawback to that only using proportionality. As closer it gets, there's a paradox with that as well. It says that you cannot reach the other end of the room diagonally, because uh, before the arrow does not reach the target, because it has to get to the halfway point, and then the halfway point, etc. When actually you reach the other end, you never reach. So that actually happens mathematically here. You asymptotically approach it, keep on approaching it, you never reach it. So in order to challenge that, you need a mechanism that looks back at what's the take, the date is, like the date it needs to pay, and then it like drives the proportionality up in order to reach that goal. That's the integral part. What it does is that it checks continuously checks that how far behind we are from reaching the target, and it keeps on like adding a term, adding an extra term to it. So the second part of that. So when you're closer, you are getting closer, the proportionality, this value becomes smaller, this value takes over. The challenge there is the integral part does not have a self-correction mechanism for itself. So what ends up happening is that it shoots through, goes to the other end, then basically has to come back again, because that part of self-correction is there. So when it realizes that, hey, I'm way off, when it the latency of looking back catches that, hey, I'm way off, that's when it tries to self-correct itself and tries to go back. But it results in a harmonics, as in oscillation, like it's basically a ringing, where it never again, it does not reach the set point. It oscillates around the set point, because it always has some amount of um, delta time to look back on, to identify that, hey, I need correction, I need to correct myself, right? That's where the derivative. So by the way, this integral term, you can look at it as the antithesis, the the term that tries to correct the proportionality, the echo chamber, by bringing in the counter argument and fixing the part. The only thing is that there's also the exact same kind of latency that gets in. And that's the part we actually talked about before, is that we always end up overdoing any kind of social changes that needs to happen. When the discussion comes in a generation and a half, we basically overdo it, and then we have to again go the other direction a little bit, right? So that's what ends up happening with integral term. Now, what to do about this? There's another way to approach this, is that the derivative term. So the derivative term approaches in a way that it has very little to no effect at all when starting, but it checks for the delta it needs to reach around the set point and dampens the response, sorry, the basically the value by adding or subtracting the corrective term, that is look ahead. So as integral part was look back, like how much we have not achieved what we should have, and adding it to it. Derivative term is like how much, uh, how strongly are we gonna um, cross the set point, and dampening the response by that. And if that is not the case, then letting it happen. Like go fast if we are not approaching, but slow down if we are approaching that point. In that sense, what it does, it basically helps us stick that landing. So you, depending on the values, you still have that. Not this animation would be kind of appropriate to see how it ends up happening. There are more. So basically what ends up happening in the ideal state is it goes straight like this and asymptotically kind of gets closer and then touches it, and depending on the parametric values you get the landing, how closely it sticks the landing, right? So hopefully that made some sense. I'm not sure whether how much it came out in the diagram. My point is we don't have the third aspect in our what would be an umbrella term for what dialectics is about, or what dialectics tries to fix. So that part, this would be the third part that we need to add, which I'm calling it the hypothesis part, which is look ahead. Where do you want to stick the landing? Looking ahead for that, and then correcting the other two side of things, like thesis and antithesis gets corrected by the hypothesis and then sticks the landing where it needs to be. So there are lots of, like, I don't have word for a lot of things, maybe because I didn't do enough reading about it. This is kind of a original thought, so I need a lot of supporting elements to build it up into a theory. I'm done saying the things that I wanted to say. I am looking for the criticism on this part.
Yeah, I'm not sure you're going to get much in the way of criticism as much as a critique. Uh, so, um, I do think so. When I said landing, I pretty much had something similar in mind, though not. This is a good mathematical demonstration of what I was talking of. And now I realize what you said last day when you said that hypothesis is the thing that's missing. Um, so that connects back. And I do agree that in the sense that if we are to plot the rate of change of topic, which is also what I was saying, that if we look long enough at something, so what is worth looking long enough? If something is appearing in the vision, then stay with it, slow down your approach, and then invariably you're going to overshoot it a bit, then come back and land. So I think that there are multiple hypotheses on which I think we both are operating. At least that is what I meant by a certain higher order thinking that has already happened. Sorry. The reason we are not shooting off target really is that some of those targets far enough or fundamental enough have been identified. So I think it's a matter of letting down some of those hypotheses, um, then discovering the hypothesis or articulating the hypothesis would probably be the primary focus of these discussions, each time with the aim to land the hypothesis in that sense. Um, so your hypothesis is the blue mark, and in the process, some things will be things that we'll find
No,
solved.
the hypothesis is not the blue mark. If you go back to Hegelian interpretation of the reason he came up with this is that the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, the Trinity, right? He was trying to kind of symbolize the Trinity, which also Freud did with the ego, superego, and all this. So that was kind of something everybody was trying to connect back with the theology of that time, which was already, which I already identified or symbolized that, okay, there's a Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and they form the Trinity. Um, from Hegel's interpretation, he said that those three things, like the thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, were those three things. My point is that's not. The synthesis is the Trinity, and the Spirit has to be the hypothesis. Son is the id, or Son is the proportionality. The Father is the antithesis or the superego. But the thing that lands the landing, like that is the hypothesis part that you need. That's the spirit. That's the ego. That's the part you need to land the. And overall, they connect back as a trinity. Overall, they connect back as a the synthesis. So synthesis is not complete without the hypothesis. What ends up happening is that we have not integrated that as a process in our um, even like till contemporary. We kind of look down on somebody hypothesizing something as you don't have solid data for it, right? My point is solid data is only possible as a looking option for looking back, as the that integral aspect of things. For you, if you want to stick the landing and not overdo anything, not do the damage, the only way to do that is look ahead. And for that matter, you cannot have solid data. You need to have the differential part aspect of the thing. So which is where the third aspect, the spirit, or whichever way you want to interpret is, that needs to happen. So the overall thing comes as the trinity. Overall, that comes up as the synthesis. But I think that those three things, that parts of the trinity, are that thesis, antithesis, and the hypothesis. Together they make the synthesis, or together they should make the synthesis, which is much more nuanced than the previous approach.
I mean, in some sense, we are talking epistemology, so why not?
Yeah. Oh, I should read this. As in, I haven't gone through this. This is new for
So
me.
the epistemology that you would find in some of those Eastern traditions
Hmm.
breaks down those concepts into further stages of proof. So you look at Buddhist epistemology, you look at Nyaya epistemology, Shankar epistemology. Uh, Shankar is probably the one who simplifies it in some sense, but it's Dvaita, so it talks of two materials. Then you have Advaita, which tries one nation, one election kind of strategy. Everything is one. Uh, but Nyaya does this very interesting thing where it was a practice. Now, why I shared this as opposed to Hegelian dialectic is they are talking about the same things. They have very, very strong similarities. But these were traditions who ceremonized their usual exchanges. These were philosophies born out of people actually discussing, questioning each other, coming to the truth. That is where Torko comes from.
Yeah.
As it happens, if you look at the list, stage number 8 of the 16 categories is called Torko, or hypothetical slash suppositional reasoning. So Torko Corona is basically somebody says, don't hypothesize. If you hypothesize, you are already on stage 8. You're not far enough from actually achieving knowledge. But these were basically the 16 categories that, now what these categories mean, will leave that to coming outside of this entire thing. But if you just scroll down a bit, like the overall epistemology, right? That you have perception, pratyakha praman, and within which you have determinate, indeterminate. Then you have onuman, so inference, and these systems also standardize in some sense or formalize certain lines of inquiry that Western philosophy just ignores as voodoo. But turns out there is enough details in this schools of knowledge, and will you will find yourself very familiar with those. They all it struck me when I read Nyaya the first time. Oh, that this is how they have categorized it. I know all of these sensations. It's like they have presented me a curated, ordered structure to that exact chaos. Now, of this, these are like these are degrees of formation of knowledge. So Proman, which is the strongest? So it says that before perception, inference is not as strong but good enough. Then you have Upaman, which is comparison, which is again not that analogy, which is what you get to if you can't infer. Then you have Shabdo, which is testimony, somebody else's words. But the interesting thing is, you can start this process outside in. And if you then look at these three stages, you kind of again reach that sort of trinity, because the hypothetical reasoning happens when you are discussing or when you are like that is where the dialectic comes in. So Hegelian dialectic and Torko in are kind of they are the things you would apply to get to that hypothetical supposition. But all I'm saying is that you're on the right track. This is, I mean, that was a bit patronizing, but uh,
No, no, no.
you're on the
It's
right track in the sense that I would just say that Hegel is good. Keep this on the other side, and keep the Buddhist epistemology on the other side, because what that says at its fundamental nature is you got to try things to believe it. But
yeah.
if you don't get to try,
Mm.
what do you do?
You have to assume. You have to imagine.
So basically, these all are people. If you read those treatises, you find these are people sitting randomly and asking what if questions.
With a very little resource, which is why like my respect kind of goes for those people who have thought about these things with so little resources. They couldn't have, for the like, even if best they tried, they couldn't have known all the other things that have happened, all the other people who are thinking in the same terms. So I kind of feel that we are so lucky that I can have a day job and also like uh, do this for fun, right? Which is insane. For many people, they had to leave their life, essentially the way of living, in order to even get anywhere closer to this. So which is also like, I should not take this for granted, but yeah, it opens
But
up.
there is an allure of that life. I came to that. So this was my thought when I first studied this, and this was for second year. Sorry, first year, second semester philosophy. And my first thought was these people built so much, exactly these words, without so little. And this was 2009, and I was like, if they had the technology today. Okay, so we'll keep on saying this, but then as I learned more, I realized that these technologies, like these are technologies to the point of understanding knowledge. You apply these things to a knowledge base, to creating a knowledge system, and you don't have to be a product manager. These people have been your product managers. You just bloody implement what
Yeah.
they're saying in these stages.
Yeah.
And because they worked with such small data window, their
Mm.
computation is very resource conservative,
Mm.
right?
Not wasteful at all, essentially.
Which means the computations have been broken down to their smallest forms, where they are understandable, then logically built up as a foundational system, and highly technical interconnected sets of work.
Yep.
So basically, I'm saying they were the product managers. Like epistemology is product management of knowledge.
Yeah. I see that. I see that form, essentially.
And I think one of the things one of the hypotheses that I have been operating on is what what framework these people had created can be implemented using the technology that we have today without the individual, because a lot of this practice then went on to the sadhak.
Mm.
Mm. So you don't then have to be the sadhak. You can, if you can outsource to the babas that you have always wanted
Hmm.
to outsource these decisions to,
Hmm.
why not just like try a different baba, a baba that actually understands these things, has been built with some like these technologies in mind. But anyway, going too vague, what I mean is that I believe it is possible to build a knowledge base that employs these systems of knowledge, and then you know build those views. So given the same set of events, can I have a Hegelian dialectic view of the events? Can I have a Nyaya view of the events, which are just different queries, different structured queries producing different kinds of data structures out of the same fundamental thing that you were seeing, I am also seeing, which is the nature around them.
Right. Right. So that way, this is those all those previous prior works. They're basically stepping stones to go forward, go further. Right. Whenever,
Absolutely.
yeah. So that's how I'm seeing it. So there are lots of uh, these things. All these things should be kind of kept as a, like, okay, in the appendices and or the references section, that hey, this builds on top of these things. Uh, in order to go forward, you cannot just have a solution and as a capsule and just eat it. You basically, if you understand the which what are the parts it builds on top of, that gives you a better mileage. So I think all the prior attempts, because the best they could do is build in the present by looking at the past, that was the best approach that they could have taken, like, very definitively, because we have to identify this thing as well. The What we are doing now is the taking over of the derivative part. Think about, because we're closer to the set point, that's when the derivative takes up, like in picks up the pace, because that's where it starts mattering more, right? So we are bringing in that part, and so far it hasn't been used as much, because so far that part of the equation was very minuscule, ignorable. More what mattered was the proportionality and the backlog, or like, hey, we need to fix this thing now. Where to get to, we have a very closer view of, because we are kind of reaching that. If for the lack of a better set point, let's say the super intelligence is the set point that we are looking at, we are kind of approaching that closely enough that we need to, if we don't stick the landing, there are a lot of people are talking about what are the dangers that involved with that. So point is, now it starts mattering. Now we are bringing that aspect, that part of the equation up, and try to stick the landing. I don't see the previous approach as the wrong or false or something. It's just at that point, that's the best they could have done, and at that point, those two are the things that mattered more. Now that which is starting to matter the other way, let's make it more comprehensive and use the other term. I just want to less like destigmatize the usage of hypothesis, because if you look at it from even the school or childhood, or like, if, or even especially in, we are data driven, whenever people say that, what they're trying to nullify or invalidate is that somebody who is pitching an idea that they don't yet have solid data for, and to demotivate them from going ahead and gathering the solid data for it, right? So that's what ends up happening. I want to destigmatize that part, that aspect of the entire discourse when that happens, and overall push it out into the system, like the general zeitgeist, or whatever you call it, like the, is that the pronunciation, zeitgeist, the and so um to make everybody come to that conclusion that, hey, it is, from temporal perspective, we cannot only look at the present and the past, future matters just as much, because the other parts of the discussion that will eventually come to, where if you look at the actualization of the universe, it basically is a temporal loop in a sense. You, it's like a rubber band. Where's the ending? You cannot find where's the ending or the beginning is, if you start seeing the whole thing as a temporal loop. So it is relevant to be mindful about the whole directionality, the spline of time, and not only just look back on one direction. Yeah. Right. So this is one of the topics that I want to kind of like build upon. I'm pretty sure like we touched on this like two episodes. Like last time I talked about this. This time I'm showing some of the data about this. Um, I'm pretty sure that there will be more terms and all those things that I'll come up with and start enriching this particular topic. This is going to be one of the topics. Um, yeah, so let's put a pin on that and move forward with other things that we may want to talk about. I have a lot of other things, but do you have anything else to talk about this?
I think this deserves a bit more elaboration just for the sake of more understanding.
Yeah, may you hear me?
Yes, what happened?
My headphone decides to go to sleep from time to time. It's grown old. It's like I have too old. I'm taking out.
I don't think you are speaking through, as in the mic changed essentially. The mic source changed.
Yeah,
Yeah,
should be
better.
better now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had reconnected, but it has switched back. Yeah, so anyway, I was saying that this topic deserves a bit more elaboration before we move on to others, because
Mm.
there is something fundamental that this connects to what I have been working towards and thinking,
Okay,
and
bring it
it's
on.
to sort of write this down, right? Um, so the hypothesis that I mentioned, that it should be possible to take some of these tools for mass consumption. And when I say mass consumption, let me rephrase that. I mean regular consumption for myself and to those I want to share the information with. I'm looking at a inside out network. And for the same reasons that atoms form, then connect, uh, and the connecting force being a sort of gravity. So what I see this possible, like being possible to do, is pretty much the same thing that if you look at AutoMerge, that local first project, in some sense, my approach to knowledge management is kind of similar to their approach to dev tooling, where they say that if developers have built enough tools to make their life easier, developers specifically, the sort of debugging and things that don't exist for other technical professions, besides software design, because we used line based things, and their premises to bring the same kind of things that clearly some small people are benefiting out of implementing within their domain, bring those concepts and apply to a set of baseline fundamental tools that can also apply to other domains of creative work.
Right.
And what I'm trying to say here is that I feel like my approach to, I mean, they have explained it in a certain way. So I'm just using that analogy, that I feel like there are all these different epistemological theories, which, if you just look at them as investigations, queries, and frameworks to understand, categorize, dissect knowledge, um, I see different them as those lenses that I had mentioned, right? Lenses of looking at reality are what each of these frameworks are.
Yeah,
So what
like
happens?
Instagram filters.
Yeah, and the now here is the key part. Each of them start telling you that there is a certain moksha, a nirvana, whatever orgasm, whichever stage. Like there is a certain stage that you can reach if you follow these certain processes. Now, if you break down those processes, study deeper, you'll see that they are very logical, very one after the other, very well structured journey, meaning that it is possible to reach that moksha. And it's like a definition of done, that there is a clear definition in each of these traditions. What do they mean by their equivalent enlightenment is the word that I was looking for. What is the equivalent enlightenment in their traditions? What does that mean? And as it happens, it is a lot of analytical data processing, sensory data processing, building up maxims, building up more and more compressed knowledge, uh, which some of them also talk of that neoteny that you mentioned, that how do you get a crystallized knowledge but retain the neoteny? That is a sort of moksha state or pre-moksha state for most of these systems. But then my question, my what if scenario is, what if we could codify these, do the computations, and just try to reduce the time it takes to arrive at that moksha in maybe a scoped way? So specific intelligence as opposed to general intelligence. But it is possible to arrive at moksha, which is now if I just basically try to pass a data set through the kind of filters they have talked of, practices they have talked of. Practices are loops, filters are, well, like stages are filters. You have to pass certain rituals to get somewhere, or go through certain commandments. It's a very well articulated system. So if you can think of a flow, you would be able to map out each of these into very complex flows. And if you then think of it from that flow based programming or functional programming concept, you should be able to build higher order functions which basically form these. And my hypothesis there is, with or without AI, it should be possible to build those structural manifolds which provides a sort of queryability into existing data. And then one of those views is like just a model that understands the Nyaya way of uh, looking at knowledge, which means it can categorize based on everything you throw at the knowledge base, that these were the testimonies, shabda, that you had heard, these were the hypotheses that you had conjectured, these were the inferences that you had built, these were the experimental perceptions that you have had, and thus this is the knowledge that you have gotten, and these are, you can trace these back to these proofs with this much certainty. The probability of knowledge happening is baked into these systems, so not everything is certain. You can get conflicting inputs. Roshchuta Roshchuta Sharpobram, Rojjuta
Rojjita
Sharpobram.
Rojjita Sharpopram, yeah.
Yeah, because some languages also call it a Roshu. It's like which one. So basically, that Rojjuta Sharpobram is basically that some might be saying Sharpo, but it is probably a lower confidence score compared to you have touched it and you have felt it to be a rope. Sensory perception, again, sensory perception may gradations. So basically, I see huge value in taking this, at least some epistemological thinking, which is again the past, to address the challenges of the present, which is building them up into systems that can process data and produce meaningful outputs, to actually build some sort of an emulator or plan for the future. A sufficiently well structured plan can be called an emulator, because you can probably run it and play with it to emulate the conditions that might just happen. So I'm basically starting from that hypothesis, that what would it need to then build a system like that? And turns out just that question has a lot of cross-cutting implications across the system. So what is the difference?
Right.
So just to sum that up.
What I'm
What I'm
hearing, what I'm hearing,
yeah, bolo.
not to cut you off, like
Let get you to do that. Yeah.
go on, finish it. Then I'm
No,
okay
no,
with
no.
it.
I mean, I'm just saying that
Okay.
maybe what you will be able to do is sum up that better.
Yes. So you're talking about the application aspect of this, which is gradual next step anyway. Once you have built up something that is solid, once you build up a tool that works, the next step is definitely application aspect of it, right? The challenge there is I am very bad at that part, like, or realizing when it's
Right.
good enough
So
tool to be useful for somebody
I
else.
am not interested in the application, so to say. When we say application, there is a certain application of philosophy. When you are going into a debate, that is an application of philosophy. That is applied philosophy. When you're writing a treatise, that is applied philosophy. I'm saying there is a scope to build certain fundamental building blocks of software which exhibit these systems. So just to map them out in the form of a framework
Right. Oh,
that,
that part. Got it.
Yeah, so when I say application, I'm talking of that. I'm talking of, it's like converting what somebody said as a proof to a series of mathematical equations. If there is a logical flow, so then what would be those components? What would be like the building blocks of such a system? And that keeps on taking me toward graph, like nodes, components, actions, workflows kind of system. And by now, so these were kind of niche, I would say, in 2014. Like flow based programming was like limited to airplane software design and all. But now with the no code, low code thing, you see that everybody's implementing flows and kind of bringing back that part of things, which makes me think that we don't even need to build the application layer.
Hmm.
In the truest sense, we could be building that common API, that common library, or the fundamental building blocks, which then, well, render using Unreal Engine, render using something like your user interfaces could be anything. Build a game for all I care in which the learner is tested on Nyaya epistemology.
Right. The challenge that am seeing here, the reason it seems like GPT-4 or maybe even GPT-5 or something like that would not readily be able to do this is because there's a fundamental issue of what their initial starting condition was. And their initial starting condition was not to look at the world epistemically, the data that it has, but more, I might be able, like I might misinterpret this or say it wrong, but continue a conversation essentially. That's that's basically what it is trying to do by looking at all the data that has happened before, where the discussion goes. Like, doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong or based on which framework can you decide or even approach it to be right or wrong. And again, that Rojjute Sharpabharam part, so I do see it. What Google Bard has done is that it comes up with 3 different answers and lets you choose which one, which way of approaching it would you prefer. Something similar can be done with various degrees of tunability, where you can, for a model that actually is going that direction, where it actually has the understanding and interpretation of, oh, if you want consequentialism as a, like, your preferred mechanism, then you go and interpret this way. But if you are more of a deontologist, you go in that way. And those two can both be the answers that you're looking for, depending on what your preferences are. But it understands that, right? There are some, so the models do nowadays, the models do understand those concepts a little bit, as in it will continue the discussion. Claude does better than ChatGPT, so Claude is probably the best one on that particular aspect. But fundamentally they are not built to, like, for episteme. They were built for just continuing a conversation or discussion. So that's where I see the challenge. But it's not so much of a challenge. It's just we have to wait a little while, maybe by the end of this year or early next year, by which time the entire, like, we'll understand it enough that, hey, now that we have done this, we have built the application layer of how to use these things, or how to retrain them, how to fine tune them, how to change the initial condition and what is required to do that. Those parts will be better understood. Once that is done, then we actually can build up a model that does exactly this. In fact, that can become one of the co-hosts of this show, um, and, like, basically fact check us or correct us or basically point our blind spots, saying that you forgot to do that, you forgot to, like you brought up the Nyaya Shastra into this, right? That was helpful. That was yet another triangulation point. It can do that much more readily. Real-time context that comes up, like whatever we're talking about, it comes like, these are the things that already has discussed about these things, and this is how you can connect it, or there's a decoherence. All those things can be approached that way. I'm actually looking, like, forward to that time that day, but I am not really sure exactly the process of how we can approach it right now. Like, it would take quite a lot of work to actually get that to reality.
Yeah, and I have been kind of hovering around this topic for a long while, to the point that just what those fundamental data structures would be of such a system.
Right.
Because it looks like you can't leave everything to the AI, you can't leave everything to the human. And that is where these frameworks come in, because they are a very well programmable set. And just like being able to write that fundamental data structure in the way, or not data structure, like the, let's say, the solution in a way that you have these nodes, you have uh, like you basically actions, functions, whichever way you put it. There I have tried 3 4 different ways, and in each of them where the AI plugs in is as a very specific purpose, well trained computation on very narrow band aspects of things. But again, this is connected to, like, my goal with this is, remember what I had said, that I want libraries to form as I continue living my life. It's basically tying to that,
Right.
that retrievability is a very strong aspect of each of these.
So to continue from that aspect, I am seeing a lot of positive movements on in that direction, where the nebulousness, you remember I complained about that, hey, we have come to a point where I can write a node module, and somebody somewhere in Serbia or Indonesia, people can just pull it and use it through the API that I have defined, and it will be, the entire ecosystem is very well formed. But if I write a paper about something, you cannot readily utilize it in your maths readily. It still will have to be somebody who has to go through all those different people who are reviewing that process, right? The proving something had been nebulous and very much human dependent for a long time. Now some progress are being made to challenge that. In fact, mathematicians are kind of getting frustrated about it, that what's the need for us in that case anymore. So this is one of the, I don't know whether this is going to be the winner in that sense, but this approaches that and solves that problem. How do you pitch a proof of something that connects from human to machine bidirectionally, right? So now systems can prove things and present it to humans. Humans can verify, add or add addendum to that. But all those things are possible now. This is huge in a sense. If we have a deterministic system for proving knowledge, and we can set the data point about, hey, these are the data points. Now those two things combined actually helps us get to the point that we're talking about, where there's a model that can do that, be assistive enough, or basically just complete enough information, complete enough in that regard, that we can go and ask some about something or introduce a new data point, and it will have enough context to know which bucket to put it in, how to create the embeddings where in the vector location it falls on, right? So I'm seeing a lot of potential there. I wanted to discuss this, but like bring this one out since I discovered it, but didn't come out as an I, I I I did I couldn't remember it when I needed to. So this time I remembered it. Look into that. You might like it the way
Well, you're talking of the lean prover that
Lean
you shared.
Prover. Yeah, yeah. The ecosystem around it, or the, so same way what ChatGPT made frustrated the school teachers in a sense. Similarly, this lean prover is making mathematicians frustrated in that particular narrow domain, fringe domain. Uh, I just want you to just go through that and have that in your context when we're talking about these topics, that hey, tools like this are either they already exist or they would become relevant in upcoming time. think about Rust back in 2013, right? Something like that. This is the Lean Prover is like Rust back in 2013. Sorry,
Hmm.
go ahead.
Yeah, no, no. I just realized I had unmuted, and then I went to speak. I muted myself. So, uh, as it happens, I have tried implementing the basics in so many different languages. I have a Go version. I have JS, Vanilla JS. I have Sales JS. I have. I haven't tried Python because, well, yeah. But Rust is where these concepts just fit. Even Haskell, I have tried both Haskell and OCaml, and it was like, okay, nice. If I was a mathematician, I would have approved. But with Rust, implementing some of these, it feels like the language was built to handle these sort of complex low level systems. And which makes, like, what the point I wanted to make is like Rust is the natural choice to implement any such things that we are discussing, and then make use of the API, make use of Awesome. You are opening up doors to
Can you
pretty
imagine
much
the
every other.
reason for that? Why did that end up happening?
I do
I
feel
have a
like it's
thought.
one of those critical inflection points, right? That at a point when, well, are you saying historically about the Rust
No, no, no.
project? I don't
I'm
know
talking
that.
about why Rust ended up becoming this. If you
I mean, in
remember,
that
it
sense, it's
went
a
through
derivative word.
two or three
Yeah,
sets of transformation, like massive
yeah,
transformations. But where it landed, it seems very
yeah,
appropriate for
yeah.
this, right?
I mean,
Why that is the
the borrow
case?
checker frustrated people, of course, but then the type system, the uncompromising focus on maintaining that type system, because it is the type system which makes it ergonomic to implement a lot of these. The second was Rust deciding not to be just a unsociable nerd, but actually become sociable, uh, get into that geek category, and connect with other things. So the API, the core was built from the foundation, like at least it's part of that, that where it is possible to connect, hook into Rust from other systems, so connectivity from other, open to connections. And then the incremental build that you were saying, that it built upon the mistakes of the past while looking into the future, but it learned the good things from the past, implemented for the present while looking at what future software can do.
I think I will have to re phrase the thing that I was going to say
Okay.
with your information, because that makes a lot of sense. What I was going to say is that it had the starting condition, the initial condition, what it tried to do, a kind of made sure that if it is successful to do that, it will end up in a state where it is ending up. However, I realized there are other let's say other languages. They tried to be purist in that sense, had very strong sense of like where it needs to go, etc. But then they didn't get exactly the same way where Rust went. And the part is what you mentioned, being the sociable thing, like taking the feedback, be willing to change yourself well enough with time and with the requirement of people, even though it takes you like it's not fun for you and it gets you down from your high horse. It's worth enough to go through the transformation, go through the like larva and pupa stages to get to that. Otherwise you get stuck in a self-loving like echo chambers, like Haskell and many other languages like that. They live that life. They're pure in a certain sense, and because they love their purism, that purism so damn much, they don't want to end up becoming what is popular by sacrificing some of the part that other people do not like about. Where Rust actually did, like, okay, you don't like it, that like it's not convenient enough, okay, let's make it easier for wider penetration, which helped. Sometimes they even went back. Some concepts they actually went back after making it way too like mushy mushy, and then it's not landing well enough. It will. So that being willing to change with time and for wider spread basically is the fundamental aspect of what um, makes a species survive, basically survivalist approach to things. That's what, along with the starting condition, because that is required. Without that, you will lose your way. You need that, but not being afraid to change with time as long as you have your North Star fixed. Those two things together is what got it there. And I'm pretty happy that one of the languages did, because usually what ends up happening, things that I put my bets on, or things that I like, quote unquote, end up failing massively because of that extensive purist standpoint. I'm really rather happy. So I also came down from that extensive purist standpoint for myself, and also saw that all the different projects or aspects of life that came down from that transformation, that metamorphosis, is what gives them the extra extended life that carries them to the next section, next phase. Anyways, go on. Sorry, I kind of distracted that.
No. I mean, it's going in
I was
the same direction.
okay.
Carry on.
I don't know whether to bring out yet another topic, but I have a couple of those things that I have been like looking into. So first of all, not first of all, like in this particular topic that we are going into, for that topic,
Sublist.
yeah, sublist for this sublist. First of all, so I had a plan about, because it fit. I have a plan about approaching three different topics and having three different names for the books, um, called white matter, gray matter, and dark matter. So the white matter is basically the philosophy. Gray matter is about the human condition, um, the psychological aspect of things, and the dark matter is about on physics, like the cosmology, etc., etc. All those three things, concepts, basically connect together. But that was the approach. I'm not so sure, because they're kind of like boiling down to the same thing, same pot. It's a little bit weird, but it seems like when you're trying to discuss on that white matter, the gray matter affects that, your perception, your human condition affects the episteme that you see, and the interpretation of the reality also gets affected by that. Anyways, one aspect of that was the philosophy of metamorphosis, looking at the systems that are impure and impure the exact right way that it become advantageous to be impure in that matter. Think about Voldemort as one example. Think about the silicon, as in doped, what do you call that, semiconductors as one example, where the right amount of doping is what gives them the superpower. Other than that, they are not super in any sense. What is it about things that when we assign value to something, we kind of do that in a Boolean sense? We say something is good, something is bad. That has been that entire moral and ethical schools of all the different ways to think about it. Aristotle did pose kind of a middle ground, okay, too much, too little, and just right. I want to kind of expand on that just right part from the perspective of, it does not live in a vacuum. That just right. Are you familiar with the concept that I'm talking about, or should I? So just to for anybody listening to this, so before Aristotle, like Plato and what's his name, Socrates, their philosophy was there's good, virtue, and vice, and they're kind of Boolean in a sense, good and bad. Aristotle was like, no, here's the thing, too much of anything is bad. If you are a person that is way too serious, that is not gonna be registered as a good thing and would be beneficial for you. If you're too much of a callous person, that also is not gonna get registered as a good thing. If you can bridge those two things together to come to a middle ground where you are serious enough but cheerful enough, that is gonna be give you the charm that people are looking for. That is gonna work in your favor. So that's the ground he was working with. He kind of created 9 of those sections and all those things, all different things that I don't think that set of like those 9 items were comprehensive enough or anything, but it establishes the point that you can see that in a spectrum. My perspective is that you can still do that in a vacuum for any of the virtues or vices by themselves. You have to look at it in which playground you are playing.
Carry on. You can
Okay,
get into this.
look at it after. Okay, fine. So the point I was trying to make is that you have to look at it in terms of where is this tool being applied, and that's where that particular customization, which any of those attributes, any of the traits can be termed as good or bad, but depending on the use cases, the utilitarian perspective, some of those things can be identified as advantageous. That's exactly what mutation is all about. How mutation kind of promotes evolution and survival of the species. That is the thing, the stochastic changes in some certain things that ends up. So that's how evolution basically promotes, okay, go through multiple generation of things, and whatever is supposed to stick around will stick around by just trial and error. That's a very like brute force way of doing something. The point is, you as a evolution does not have a brain of its own, but the way it ensures survival purely to its teleological own end, can you survive well enough to create another version of you with the good traits that you have and just loop that, right? So how am I gonna now coming back to the talk of like that entire part about the philosophy of halflings, and then I'll go to the metamorphosis part. So the halfling, that impurity. So various different aspects of life, in various different aspects of life, there are traits that people can use that gives them an advantage. Or not only people, like it transcends that. But whenever you're trying to think of any of those traits in a vacuum, you can come to a like it's good or it's bad. But the moment it gets infused with other things, other aspects of that, it becomes completely different. It becomes either a necessity or a disadvantage in a sense. Like a squirrel, you might not think why having a wing would be advantageous. But if a squirrel gets the mutation of flappy, like that hand, like the passive, to support a passive flight from to jump from tree to tree, how does that gives it evolutionary benefit to sustain its legacy? That is stochastic. It's a weird addition, and those kind of weird additions are always there. Usually we're not mindful about those things. This does not live, this entire concept does not live in a pure interpretation of virtue and vice. How do we frame that where, so because this becomes very utilitarian, and that also might be a problem for some, as in people who see things as a deontological perspective. From that, they need to know whether something is good or bad. How do we reconcile that aspect of things? Like sometimes there is no good or bad, or There absolutely is. We're just not looking at it right way. How do you think about this? By the way, are you utilitarian or are you deontologist?
I believe in complexity, and whoever gives me the complexity was I'm their slave.
I think for the lack
So,
of a
sorry, why I said that was that my gripe with most of these things is not about eh? It's not about if anything is good or bad or how people understand. My gripe is the sort of reductionist approach of morality to constantly try to bring things down to now very polarized, very small set of values. And what happens when multiple things interact, which is what you were saying. I mean, I'm just adding to yours, not negating, that the issue is that when some form of event interaction, some form of complexity comes up, that is when um, the smaller thought frameworks, the smaller moral frameworks break down. Even if you progressed as much as saying that okay, good and bad are not two values, it's a spectrum. You are still susceptible to the same thing because you are still susceptible to that one-dimensional mapping of everything that is going on. And if anything that generative AI is showing us is that to achieve higher and higher truth, better and better understanding, and better predictions, we need to embrace more complexity. We need to think in more dimensions, compute that many instances. Now, what I'm trying to say is that this there is a certain um, way of even building systems, and I don't just mean software systems, a reductionist way of building systems which in which wants to bring things down to this concepts of pure, impure, good, bad, impure being khad, like the not pure existence of the not pure. As often happens in that sense, the not pure happen to be the minority, the pure happen to be the majority, or the historical origins in which the purer happen to be the older, the non-pure happen to be the newer. So this line of inquiry, the slippery slope is it often leads to the kinds of bias where the system, the legality of the system is justified, but the effect it has outside that system, outside the purview of that system, is often disastrous. And disastrous to the point of no recovery. Like there is a certain point of no return because you have simplified things so much, you cannot trace back to what complex origins they were. And that is when superstitions emerge, or let's say xenophobia emerges. And a bunch of these things can be traced back. But then there is a certain value in retaining the complexity to a certain level. So you are map reducing, definitely, because you want certain things to be computed. But then the question is, what are those points of intervention in which the actor in this moralistic computation needs to step in and make certain micro judgments, as opposed to be given a good or bad result? Yeah, I mean, you can get a good or bad result if you want to. And some of these concepts also underpin the reformation of justice systems that we see today around us, where the entire conversations around death penalties or around mass incarceration, that a reform community work as a better option to mass incarceration, which saves the state money and so on. But if you look at the other perspective, that what you are saying is that okay, it's not pure and impure elements of the society. I know I'm going towards society a bit, but just to draw that analogy, that um, why diversity, why be inclusive? And again, connecting back to what did Rust do, which is where we kind of went into this from, is Rust embraced this resisting the reductionism, so to say, that it said that okay, you cannot just say that these are this is the way to build software, everything else is irrelevant. What it did was set certain core guarantees. One of them, one of those principles happened to be zero cost abstractions, which said that if I remove the runtime, if I reduce the runtime to near zero, or if you're using just a sync rust, you don't have a runtime, in which case, uh, you should be able to write your code in any form that you choose. You want classes, you want excessive abstraction, you can do that, but they are zero cost because end of the day, they are getting compiled to the similar underlying machine code. Now, what that gives, if you look at it, it's very federal in nature. It's saying that the core constitution remains the same. You should try to stay as close to the constitution, but certain traditions are different for you. You don't eat this, you don't drink that, you don't want this, you want these not available. That's fine. You should still be able to run the same federal system without trying to impose on each other or take over the system. So this, the sort of ingrained decentralized federal nature of also looking at community, of also looking at the systems, the same thoughts build the systems, the same thoughts like the community first approach. It's kind of like I described this to somebody a few weeks back, that Rust is basically at some point uh, introverts in whichever sense, like socially awkward people eventually deciding that they'll do better work if they just for once work with each other. They don't have to like each other, they don't have to party with each other, they have to build RFCs together. They have to vocally critique the work. They have to review the pull requests. They have to draw the roadmaps. Wait, it's kind of like a wizards convention. So in that sense, Rust is like United Nations done right. It has a functioning product. It is not a body crippled by similar, very similar motives. If you compare, what is it that United Nations does not want to do, which is what makes its progress slow. And as it turns out, if you were to make some drastic changes in United Nations to ensure certain actions towards climate change, they start looking like some of the things that the Rust community has done. Some point you have to draw a boundary and say no. But at some points, you also have to be accommodating, convince the existing people in the group that you have to let these people in. You cannot be a roadblock. You cannot block their coming into the community. But to those new people coming in, also sensitize them that, look, this is the existing set of people. Once you are in, you have to play by these rules, and these are non-negotiable. So,
Yeah,
I mean, I was just trying to tie this
yeah,
together,
agreed. Yeah, go ahead, go ahead. I
that
was saying
the
that I agree.
morality,
I see the point in like the connection between the two. Yes.
yeah, so the morality part, what I feel is the question is not, should not be one that of purity and impurity. uh, the question of purity only comes in the case of the conductivity. If the purpose is verified, that do we need a homogeneous society? Do we need a homogeneous classroom? Do we need a homogeneous colony, country, or a homogeneous even software system? In whichever way you think of it, it seems like if it is more result oriented, if it is more outcome oriented, then the first thing to identify is the purpose valid? So for example, you say that we need only like certain type of people in the army for the army to function at its peak, which then goes into gender segregation, racial segregation, caste segregation, because upper caste people won't take orders from lower caste people, so you have to break down caste, it seems, before you can have a functional army. And then army is like, you know what, let's just hire upper class men or upper caste men. That is one way to solve the problem. The entire thing will operate very smoothly. But unless you establish the purpose, then, and what I'm trying to do is bring in the complexity and saying that do not anchor on the end result. Do not just evaluate the end result. Evaluate the purpose, evaluate the process, and compute the end result, and have the heart, have the courage to accept that end result. If your process is well established, if your purpose is well reviewed, and you are executing in a certain way, be okay with the results, because it's likely that you have not seen certain variables which might be impediments during your design. This is called the agile way in software development, as it turns out. That be open to reacting to things, optimize for people, build processes for people, not the other way around. And the reason humanity keeps on circling back on some of these core tenets is that it seems like if you ignore complexity, you are doing the same kind of idiotic gesture that a hunter gatherer human just tries to be careful of the tiger at the peril of ignoring the forest fire, which is, I want to keep tigers away, I want to put fires all around me. Tigers are bad. So basically, you don't want to go down that reductionism. Now, where this is the slippery slope is minds like your and mine can constantly self-check and stay on a certain blade's edge, even when conducting something which is just with two values or which is with homogeneous. There is that sense of alertness. On an average, humans don't have that alertness. That self-correction is missing, and which is why you see religious dogmatism pervade to the point, because those are simpler frameworks to look at the world. These people are not stupid. They're not stupid in the sense that they are not capable of computation. But you just can't compare a Pentium 2 processor, put it with a Core i9, give them the same task. I mean, not the right
Exactly,
example.
not the right example. In a sense, I was trying to correct the analogy. It's not about
Yeah,
the
yeah.
hardware.
It's
Hardware
not
can
about the
be software that is running does not understand or does
yeah,
not.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
in that sense,
it's almost like a
it's more
Linux
like
versus Windows kind of
it's a
difference.
Linux
On the
versus Windows.
exact same Core i9, if you
Yeah,
apply the right software, it can work it
yeah.
differently. Yeah,
And what is the difference? That Windows is trying to take a lot more decision for you.
yeah.
What does religion, what is the solace of religion? Practicing religion is, it is computing, so it is giving you a small set of moral codes, pre-computed, believe in it.
Delegating.
Limited customizability.
Yeah. So, what is religion doing for you? I was trying to answer that question. Would that be
Yeah,
like delegating responsibility in a sense, like the on the face of
it
unknown,
is.
instead of trying to figure
It
it out?
is.
Like, I'll do it myself, and not no. This is so that kind of goes into a discussion about isn't there a saying about like know what you can control, know what you cannot control, like and know the difference. It's something like that. It sounds something like that. I'm pretty sure I'm messing it up in a sense. So what it says that there are things that you cannot control. Don't be too worried about it, because there is also again overdoing that part and going into substance abuse and all the other kind of things, where it kind of helps to assign that to a destiny or a god or something like that, that's the part I cannot control. Let that be it, whatever that is. Let's focus on the part that I can control and hope that my life turns out as something that I am okay with or happy with, or I can give myself the illusion of that's the best life that I can have. That pretty much where it boils down to the entire concept of worship. Why would you want to worship something or go back to um, like basically sign your free will away in a sense to some extent? If something happens because your destiny wanted it to be, that means it's not that you that changed the destiny, but destiny wanted your path to go that way. So that is kind of signing away your free will in a sense. Why would you, again, it doesn't matter where I stand on the free will part, like the keeping that aside, I'm talking about the in general sense. So that's where the concept of this entire, so that results into a broken self-regulation. If you're expecting somebody is doing the regulation, That means you are not responsible or liable for the regulation. And what happens when we don't use a particular muscle? It atrophies, right? So that's the same thing when you're talking about the part about being able to work or like walk on the knife's edge and not being able to. Why that happens? Why people don't, like most in general, don't want to or can't or fail to walk on that knife's edge is because they lose that muscle, they lose that self-regulation because they attribute they delegate that regulation part itself on somebody else. And I'm not talking about only on religion. It does come down to the regulation of like the what the justice justice system, etc. It also does come down to that. It comes down to the governments as well, like all the system where you need to look up to somebody like a big brother or a father figure in order to get something done anywhere. That means you are weakening yourself. You are not.
Just a
Yeah.
small political commentary at this point is this is the part I feel like resonates the most with Ambedkar warning people about hero worship in Indian politics. And he was kind of talking from this delegation perspective as well, that we are prone to doing that because it is easier, because it is more convenient, we are more thought through. But yeah, end of commentary. The curious part though in all of this is that you can in fact live your life in binaries. But just wanted to tie this up to one of the maxims of life for me. I think I briefly touched it on last days. Be wary of binaries and
I mean,
be excessively skeptical of monogamies. And in either sense, the reason for that wariness is that it's okay to walk on that knife's edge. And again, each of these systems, the philosophical systems that we're talking of, what they're trying to do, the role they play in a human's life, they are sort of a competitor to religious beliefs. You will find at every step, whether they mock or ridicule or this, they claim to be delivering an alternate lifestyle to what everyday religious practice is granting you. And that is in sort of the complexity of things. But how it grants is it says that you would eventually go back to doing the same kind of things. You would eventually understand what is good or bad, what is the self, what is the other. You would end up with this knowledge of binary, but by then you would have learned how to compute the binary. And walking on that knife's edge is then that balancing act that you are doing, constantly evaluating, checking yourself, that are you at any point transgressing these boundaries, which should then call to question your final decision. Which means it's saying that with enough practice, in a certain form, humans can be better moral, like more moralistic creatures, be able to compute good and bad quicker, because it also warns you about the non-computational complexity owning problem, that you suddenly expose yourself to a lot of complexity and you hit that numbness, the indecision. So for these traditions, the goal is not to stay in that indecision, but to be decision makers, very fast decision makers, very intuitive decision makers, where your decision making is backed by these things. So you're not offloading that computation unless you're offloading that computation to certain systems, which form under this. And that is where their proof of knowledge, their way to moksha and all come in. But basically, they're saying that you can, if you want to be the dharmic, some say that you be the ideal citizen. Most of these are chasing ideals in some way or the other. Uh, and that ideal is that blue line, that is where we want to be. They are first pointing that out. So they begin with a hypothesis, a
no, that's not a
hypothetical statement.
hypothesis. That's the set point. That is the
No,
Trinity
I'm saying they
itself.
begin with the
Yeah.
hypothesis that we want to be there. Let's first prove our intention. It's at the starting point. It's like saying first you wahan pe jana hai. Do you think you want to go? First figure that out before you start on your journey. You don't want to be lost. So you start on your journey, look up the map, do your research, then start walking. So then you start approaching that curve. So basically, in this foundational work, a lot happens in that part before takeoff. And that is the initial state, basically. The verification and validity of that initial state is just as important for them to then say that, ab to you will go the right way. So they're basically putting that computation there, charting your path, then letting you go. It's like if you then follow the trajectory, it's like Chandrayaan 3, right? With minor remote commands, you should be able to land in the right place.
Right.
But the computation is done before launch, which
That's
I
the
wonder if
part.
that
That's the
connects
part.
to the
I would. My interpretation of that is, it starts the way it starts. It starts holding hands of a very limited set of entities that wants to head that way. Over time, more associations come in and gives it the momentum it needs, which is why it gets closer. Now, the only challenge is, again, I don't want to harp on that particular thing for far too long. The proportionality part of things, it basically whenever it reaches close enough, it basically loses the interest. We almost there, so I'm not interested about it anymore. In that sense, a lot of people have become comfortable at the 80%, like reaching 80% success, and be fine with that. That's when you need to find the people who are like, no, this is not ideal, we need to pull it up. And that's where the integral comes in. So again, not to dwell on that, but I think that's the way. It's not about pre-planning the whole thing before the journey starts. That's not, even though I would prefer it to be that way, the planner self would want to be that way, but usually it
no, but
turns.
you are like identifying the stages,
Yeah, I'm
like the
saying that,
route,
yes,
so to say.
yeah, I'm
Right?
saying that somebody just starts going that way, gradually more people join in and they figure that part out, the plan on the way. Usually that's how pretty much everything, like all the revolution, all this, that's how it happens. It's there's no, the plan is not set in stone, and it's not that if you keep it that way and don't adapt with changes, you're actually going to have much of a success. You're actually going to fail because the reality is much more messy and chaotic than you can plan out to be like complete details, right? So the part that I was saying is that it's not completely planned out from beforehand. Somebody, some entity, some particular person that wants to leave a mark on the reality starts heading on one way, and either they get the momentum to go that direction or they don't. For any kind of set point approach you see, there's thousands of set point approaches that we don't see because they fail, right? So that was the other point that I was trying to make from what you were saying. I don't know whether it goes as a correction or an addendum, but that's how I'm seeing it, the way it starts off, the journey starts essentially. Yeah.
Yep. So what I meant by charting the route is basically identifying intervention points, possible intervention points, having certain event-based thing, like I'm just telling you how these systems,
You're saying
like
how it
these knowledge.
should work, or how
No, I'm saying how these knowledge systems work. So when they are, how do they do research? So basically, when you go into the Nyaya, and I'm talking of
oh
these
yeah, yeah,
shastras,
okay, so
like
my
when you
understanding,
do that,
yeah,
yes, so I was saying that when you do that, how the approach is broken down, it's basically the question of how do you acquire knowledge.
right,
And
you are talking about a subset of people who are into this. I was
yeah, I'm
thinking
talking a
about,
subset of people who are
my
into this. And
misunderstanding was I
my
was thinking the mass.
yeah, so my question, and this is my lifelong question, is that how can I? That is what I was saying. That how can I take what these people know to the masses? That what would that look like? That was one of those hypothetical
I know the
things that
answer.
I had
I know the
said.
answer. This
Good now.
okay.
But that was the question I wanted to pose it. Now, I just want to wrap this up, this part of the discussion. And I think the final thing to mention here is the important part then in the human machine interface conversation becomes identifying, like having that ability to uh, synthesize from a hypothesis that is put to action by actors of certain sort, like the thesis and the antithesis being put to work contrasted with the hypothesis. But the part that I agree with you is that the obvious expansion to Hegelian dialectic is that the synthesis is the goal, formation of id is not, and you want to introduce that hypothetical state, at which point you have I don't know if it is more cyclic, but at that point you have more of a Nyaya Hegel hybrid in the system. And what I'm probably harping on Nyaya a bit too much, not to fan too
No, no,
much
no,
about them,
absolutely
but there
fine,
are,
because I know
I'm
that
taking
Eastern
one
philosophy,
example.
yeah,
Yeah.
Eastern philosophy actually does not stigmatize like that hypothesis is
Yeah.
part
So
of thinking. They're
that is
kind
what
of okay with
I
that.
mean. That Nyaya is most Eastern traditions do not stigmatize hypothesis. In fact, they encourage. This is what I was trying to say. Yes, these traditions encourage open-ended skepticism,
Hmm.
and they say that open-ended, if you do a closed-ended inquiry, closed-ended inquiry being tracing back from God,
Yeah.
you have already gone to the farthest extreme and you are coming down. That is where things are prone to
Hmm.
reductionist approaches.
Hmm.
But if you go inward out,
Hmm.
which is what they mean by saying that know Brahma by knowing yourself. Uh, so what does it mean by to know yourself is you're first knowing your surroundings and you're working out from that. And these two create very interesting differences. The inside out tradition is a far more synthetic tradition, far more inclusive. They result in frameworks which want people to come in, study, observe, be together, build systems to work with them better. Whereas the other one leads down to more our majority is in danger kind of attitude, because it has already known the extreme and everything then has to fit that narrative, or it will be forced fit at the cost of boxing out, removing the impurities to make it pure. And this, very interestingly, again, a lot of American queer politics uses language which is very reductionist in that sense, and you end up with labels upon labels, taxonomy done reversed. You are constantly breaking down one segment into 10 others, but first you must have that one segment. It's not like when you've identified there are 10 subsections within this one section, you now say that, okay, this was a wrong categorization, this was premature categorization. No, it has to be a directed acyclic graph of some sort. in,
I think I see the pattern in this, and the reason for that, why people go that way.
so I sent you that Joichi Itowala article.
I have it on my reading list
I
now.
have certain opinions. I want to know your take on that. The problem statement. You might not agree with his solution,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the problem statement which you might find very dear to, might, I don't know. The second link I sent is somebody else's critique of that
I see.
work. Do not read that till you feel like
The
you
first
have
one.
a
Got it.
good enough idea.
Got it.
I mean, if you don't, there is nothing you won't understand because it's primarily HCI, it's primarily UX.
Okay. The last point that you're trying to why reductionism pops out, why it ends up going that direction. This is part of a bigger discussion, yet again, yet another topic, and I know that for first few sessions this will keep on happening. So basically
I
laying
think
down
it
the
will
topics.
continue.
Yeah. But the origin of religion itself, if you see, there's a pattern to it. It starts from the void, and the highly philosophical, like, the spiritual interpretation of energy, something from nothing, etc., etc. Then it quickly goes down into fundamental forces of nature as the gods, and then it pops out as there are one thing that matters more than all the other ones. And after saying that general principle, let's put that into perspective of Hinduism, where initially you start with void. There are three different gods that basically pops out over time. It's not even like a solidified in a one sense. Like if you go through the Purans, and so you will find multiple different interpretation of that. But eventually you get that, okay, these are the more philosophical standpoint of a fringe people at the end. They have nothing else to do but think more deeply.
I mean, specifically Vishnu Puran
and
for
before
this.
and before like the Vishnu Puran is where it's kind of transitioning, like, hey, we need to convey this message to a little bit broader audience, like the kings and the people in power. So basically it's going out of the hands of scholars were fine with the very spiritual interpretation of it, like the void and like, so the duality, etc. But now you need to simplify this for people who run countries or nations, essentially. So now you're trying to convey that message to the emperors. How do you do that? Now your story will revolve around creating the gods that are emperors and or their sidelines. Like, so now Zeus, like Norse mythology or all those things, even Hindu mythology like Indra and all this thing. Now the story revolves around the fundamental forces of nature, like Vayu, and the sun, basically the air, the earth, the power of war, like war gods, etc. All those things basically come into the picture, and that's the interpretation, because that's the demography you are trying to reach out to, right? And then the third level, what happens is that the mass is still out in the void. They're basically, the life is misery and there's no end to it. You are living in that situation. Somebody comes out, says that, hey, look, all those interpretations, you are not in a position to understand this because you have been left in the gutter in your entire life without the resources to actually reconcile with those concepts that they're talking about. You don't have the tools or utility, and you are in the part you're where you are at you are at a position, if what a position, I'm not finding the right word for it, like your life has come to a point where you cannot go back and pay those debts and pick up the books and learn everything and then get to their same level. It's not possible for you. You need a simplified interpretation of this. For you, those what do you call that thing, like the Monasha Mongol and the story of the small gods, story of the one god, essentially, like only focus on this particular guy, and he or she will basically take away all your pains. That also goes down to all the Ekeshwarbad, as in the monotheism concepts as well, is that forget about the complexity and nuances of all the whole other things, the way they have tried to interpret it. For you, just this 10 commandments and this, there's only one God. That's all you need to know. Life is easy. Delegate that decision making and self-correction and regulation, which you were not equipped with to begin with. Now, your life is now much easier. Go ahead. Now, for all those people, life is actually much easier because it takes away the pain, takes away the confusion. If you are having a misery because God intended that way, maybe you have failed at one of those 10 commandments. That's why you're failing. You're having misery. Anyways, and for everything else, all the carrots and sticks aside, there's the ultimate one, carrot and a stick, heaven or hell. So basically, even if you feel like you are going through the life not being punished for bad work or not being rewarded for your good ones, you still keep on doing it because at the end of it there's a, so all those things basically comes down to that reductionist, like the one god, one dimensional belief or worshipping tendency comes down from that entire part of the how do if I don't want to take responsibility for all that thing, understanding all that thing or regulating myself, how do I delegate that whole thing to a one particular God that I believe in? And then it goes down that way. So I'm not saying that it is only about religion. It expands in multiple different dimensions, including the ones that you have mentioned. I also understand the uh, paradox, or not paradox, the irony of me trying to reduce down the whole complexity and nuance of religion, like the entire theological institution, down to like, okay, hey, there's only 3 sections. That's pretty much it. I do understand that, but sometimes you need to get a picture of a place to as a memory, and you cannot have the entire 3D model of that place. That is not practical. So that's the only reason I'm doing this. But I think that's how it ends up happening. For some people, just living with that, getting the really pain relief is not sufficient. They will keep on running around trying to find more data point, more nuances at the cost of pain, to look at more complexity, to assimilate more complexity and find out a better model, and they will take over the responsibility of regulation on themselves, and some else would not want to do that. They just want to have a happier and less painful life, and they would want to delegate that part. Okay, I'm done that on that particular aspect, that particular topic.
You sound that are better. Um, Assimilate the complexity and find a better model is the fundamental principle to build upon, to in order to resist reduction. And you're right that it takes a certain amount of madness to throw yourself constantly into the face of complexity, because it is painful to the point of being physically painful depending on what you are doing. But like the more complexity you embrace, the key is to not stay in indecision. There will be periods of indecision. The key is to know how to break out of indecision, and that is the assimilation aspect of things. The only way you break out of indecision in the face of complexity is if you can assimilate the complexity into your, as a patch onto your existing model and improve that. Uh, at which point you have reduced. So, like I said, it is resisting. In many sense, the idea is to resist reducing, but to not stop doing it, because map reduce as a function is vitally important. Which again, remember what we said in first episode, that what is important is to store these map reduced values, but also the computational, like some sort of a theorem, be it a theorem or be it like an version control
Yeah,
snapshot, and some way to prove
those are
that
the
that
edges. If you see it in the node and edge
yeah,
aspect,
it's yeah,
the the reductions are the next set of nodes, but the process through it, like if the function that it happens through it, are the edges that connects them from. You take this data point, this is the function that you apply, and you come up over there. If you apply a different
exactly.
function, you go somewhere else. But knowing the intersection and interaction between them is where you cannot say that this one function is the rule them all and others don't matter. That's one way. That's basically where the criticism I was making right now is, that that's where people tend to go, because that's easier that way.
So now, from an HCI perspective, as in human computer interface, the UX considerations, not just UX, in fact, let's just call it interaction perspective, right? The producer or the controller of the system goes from higher complexity to lower complexity. The consumer of the system, the viewer, the accessor, the learner, goes from lower complexity to higher complexity, traversing the same paths.
Are we going into that entropy discussion again? The designer.
Entropy comes in every single time. Entropy exists everywhere.
You
But
can't
what
make
I
this
said
up.
is,
But yeah,
no, no, I am not. I'm
yeah,
just arriving at it.
yeah, yeah. Go on, go on. So
Like,
sorry for
in fact,
interrupting.
I'm
Yeah,
just charting back paths I have taken
yeah, yeah.
already, but
Good.
it fits.
Yeah.
So basically, the HCI considerations that you need to do is that your system
Hmm.
needs to take in all the complexity, be constantly map reducing to give you the simplest set of values that can be portrayed on an interface. So when you look at it, you look at it as the world that appears, it appears as a world and apparently benign, devoid of details, till you start looking into things and there are infinite layers upon layers of details that you could go in. And this as a interface design principle, ever since I realized this, has built possibly the best possible APIs, best possible practices that I could ever dream of. Because connecting this back to API first, the idea behind API first design is not that you first build the API, then you think of what happens. No, it's about you identify all the possible variations in the system that can come in. Identify the interaction points, the map reducible points. Understand what to do with the end result and how to map this. How do you hide this complexity? Like it's like showing the map reduce result first, then showing the computation, then showing the input values.
What's wrong with that?
From
What's
no,
wrong
I'm
with that?
saying not wrong with that.
Yeah.
This turns out to be an excellent API design
Yeah,
strategy.
yeah, I think so, because think about it also from like I hope you don't have other things to add there immediately. I was just reflecting on that. If we are talking about a new child, like in a sense, like a new human trying to make sense of the world, how does that person start? They have to start from a present, and whenever they're curious, they can go back and look at how it came to be. That tracing back, your point, and I also agree, is that there needs to be the trace back point, like how do we get there? The entire nodes and edges should be there, retained in a sense that anybody who wants to, who's curious enough, can go and check that back. Most people wouldn't want all the paths, wouldn't check all the paths, or wouldn't find the energy to do that, which is not like, the point is, you cannot force people to know. You have to go read this particular like 5,000 year old book first, then only you get to come to like eventually understanding like the present. You cannot
Which is
do
how I
that.
was taught philosophy.
That is
The
weird.
chronological view.
Yeah,
It just doesn't fit.
it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit even at a small scale. At a very small scale, I
Because
can
the
see
realities
the
are so
reality.
different.
Yeah, the perspective is different. And how do you like expand on that perspective? Take any of the quirks of our all those mega novels. What do you call those things? The Ramayana, Mahabharata, or like the
Epics.
epics, right? So take any of the quirks, right? Why this is happening? Why Bhishma can steal two women and get them married to his brother, or whatever that is. The point is, it seems like from our value of the present, it seems weird. Now if you ask the question, then you get the answer like further down the line, like given that socioeconomic situation, these are the things that were considered heroic or good enough, like it's not considered in the, and then your understanding expands. But what if you're forced to understand from like backward first, as in from back to now? Your understanding of current would be super messed up, because at a highest level you have a limited set of memory. Memory is still, as in memory in the sense like compute element. I'm not talking about the raw memory. I'm talking about the amount of new neurons that you are working with. That's limited. Now you can have a somewhat functional model of the world view, the Umwelt, and then keep enriching it with more details as you find something interesting. But if you start from the beginning, you already have a weird sense, that weird model that doesn't fit now, and then you're trying to retrofit it to a current model, which is screwed up. I've seen this so many times and it frustrates me all the time. And the challenge is to make any, like to have this conversation with any of those systems, I have to come from so far back and like have the ground level discussion of so many things that it does not make sense to have that discussion at all. It's just like, okay, table flip, I'm out. Basically that's what ends up happening, right? The table flip does not happen. It happens inside my head, but
Yeah. It just doesn't happen because it's that much more difficult to recreate the table in its current position. Imagine if you could just reset. But I just realized, see, I keep on saying that game design has a lot to teach the rest of application designers in software design. And if you look at it, the good games embrace this philosophy that I just said, that the designers design from a higher complexity to lower complexity. The player starts from lower complexity towards higher complexity.
Yep.
The games that do this the best don't have a help manual.
Yep.
The gameplay itself teaches you
Yeah. How to
how
play.
to how to play.
Yeah.
Um, the one immediate, two immediate, three immediate. Okay, I can give multiple examples. Portal,
Hmm.
the starting of Portal or Half-Life. Well, not Half-Life in general, because Half-Life kind of started off from a certain,
All the
yeah,
Valve games.
all the Valve games. So
All the Valve
basically,
games.
everything built on the Valve platform, right?
Yep.
But
Yeah.
Portal specifically,
Yeah.
Portal 1 specifically, in the way it teaches somebody absolutely not used to computer games, not used to these controls to move. And part of the story, and this is where the design from higher complexity to lower complexity, part of the story is in the beginning it telling you it's okay, you're not able to get the controls right. You remember that you're disoriented, you just woke up from this cryo sleep.
Yeah.
And the validation it gives to the learner that, oh, I am not, sorry,
Supposed to
to the
get it
gamer,
right immediately.
I'm
Yeah.
not supposed to get it right immediately.
Yeah.
These things, unless the designers thought of the complexity that somebody might not even know the controls. If
Have you
you're
played
used to
Stanley
WS,
Parable?
huh?
Have you played Stanley's Parable?
No,
You
no,
oh my god, you're missing out. Go play that immediately after this.
right?
Or maybe first read up on that. That would give you a better mental, like,
Okay.
otherwise it's gonna feel a little bit frustrating at first, but read up a little bit and then start with it. You you are touching on that point. I just want to have that that levels, the orgasmic level of like what where does it land, like how Valve developers work and how much self-aware their games are. Stanley's Parable is an ode to that. Like the game is made to be a self-aware game. I don't think you need to read anymore. Just go ahead and install and play. It's
Go,
free.
go ahead.
Uh,
Try that.
so I think you're missing out if you don't play that game. You will. What you're saying is correct. Is right. You're just missing out on so much fun that I think you should enjoy this. Yeah, I agree. I agree. From
Mm,
designer's perspective, designer philosophy and a player
Basically,
philosophy.
I'm trying to apply some of these into software design and ask these questions. One of the reason of me trying to get out of the standard corporate ecosystem was I wanted to now. It's time. Like I have spent enough time in doing application building in generic terms. I'm still doing that for money. But the point is that I see software from this perspective that there are so many other challenges for which certain solutions exist. It's not like I was the first one to invent this. It's just my observation that I'm presenting here. What that observation says is there is enough scope to bring some of these concepts, apply them to certain other domains of human computer interaction
Bridging.
or machine to machine interaction.
Yep.
Interaction design, fundamentally, escaping the confines of a screen, escaping the confines of just a small software, being thought of as these interaction points in the world around.
Yeah.
In a broader context, what does that mean? And then what would it mean to even at with the current day technology, the immediate step, let's say, because I think there is a scope to build up to this. What is it that we can do today that in 10 years time have the rust effect on making some of these ways of thinking more mainstream? I am not saying I want 100% saturation, but I want the level of saturation that, let's say, rust
In
enjoys.
fact, that's the point. Let's not set a popularity as a matrix at
I
all.
don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
So
I'm like enough validation,
yeah.
cross a critical threshold
Hmm.
of survival, beyond which it's
Hmm.
propelled by community
Yeah.
effort.
Yeah.
To the point, I want to see these discussions manifest themselves to a point where they become the building block for the next generation to build on.
Got it.
That's my goal.
Yep. Okay. I don't know how much time you have, but let's say that we have 15 more minutes. I'm trying to finish something, a chain of thought in 5 minutes. I'll not give enough explanation,
Carry on, carry on,
but
carry on.
did
I
you give
have
us enough
rounded up.
time to think over the course of the week. This is how I'm thinking about this. I think there's merit to bring this entire discussion, all these things, as a platform, which we started with talking about. But let's start it the start of brink of new year, and until then we can have our practice runs of jotting down or basically get our ships in order, essentially. So
Tell
that
me,
we
what
know.
does such a platform look like?
It doesn't have to be too much or critical, or basically I already have something that is going, I can reuse them. Anthropic Inertia is one of the platforms that strikes me as the most uh like non
No, I
it
mean, to
doesn't look
what
dumb.
end?
I'll come to that. To what end? Like what is the end result of that is, or
No, what are the
aspects of it?
end products, or
Okay,
yeah,
yes,
like
that's what I'm coming to.
the
I'm
aspects
I'm,
of
I'm
it?
talking about talking about the brand first, because then I'll come to the product, like aspects of it, the facets of it. So Void was more of a like it was mischievous. It was not welcoming enough. But that's why I have multiple aspects of the Anthropic Inertia is the one that is actually, it is a reflective platform supposed to be, yet it is not unwelcoming. I have posted some things there, but I don't get enough time to do more. uh, Anthropic Inertia has a YouTube channel, which I messed up a little bit with contents that I don't want to post anymore. It's a very linear content. It doesn't have the longevity, essentially. But it also has a Spotify, as in the podcast aspect of it, like Substack and Spotify, and Google Podcast and all. So basically, it has a podcast and it has a blog post. What I usually do, like on with the thoughts, like things that I've done so far, is that I come up with a script, point that I want to make, then I write up about it, publish that on Substack. I use my voice model to read it out loud and use that as the podcast for this podcast platforms. I haven't started using the videos yet. So if those audio, we take the audio and generate video out of it and post it on YouTube, that can also be possible. Point is not the video. Point is the Substack and the Spotify, basically podcast subscriber model, where people can tag along, like basically press a button to let you know that they are with you, they are listening. So if there's what to what end, that's the end, where people can give you signal that they are listening, and then have a community of that, where the discussions that we are having a second or third order harmonics, resonant frequencies at multiple different levels. Once we start establishing that, so again, the brand name, forget about that. I'm talking about the
Dude,
result.
Anthropic Inertia is a perfect 2023 company name or organization name.
It is a good brand value to that exact extent, which is why I coming to that realization.
You even went with the acronyms mapping to AI.
Yeah. You see that, right? I mean, like, it's not that unobvious. Like, I know that you would say it, but yeah. So those things are basically pre-baked. I see that it has a massive potential. Let's do it right this time. Right is in the sense, let's not be too hasty about it or look for fast gratification. I know that it's gonna take some time, and given my calibration, like understanding of what happened in the past, it takes about 2 years for things to catch up to our expectations. So maybe we would have enough time to prepare ourselves to get to the point where enough people are listening, so that we need to be on topic.
Which is fine. Something else struck me, and of course,
Exactly
I'm
5
the one that
minutes.
jumps the gun.
Exactly 5 minutes.
I'm getting a lot of latency from your end.
Sorry.
You have been 8-bit dev for like an hour,
Oh, okay.
but
Sorry about that. But the
which
video
is
video
fine.
is much better. You can see it on the end of what do you call
Yeah,
it?
I know the recording. You're
Recording
recording
would
on
be
your
much better.
screen, no?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fine. So I watch the videos. I've been doing that for the last 2 weeks. I've been watching it. But I forget. See, I see the entire thing that you said, the applicability, or converting this into carving out an application from this. If it is again just to see, scratch our own itch, I kind of see, and this has been going on for a while. There is a sort of merger of Kong's future version, let's say, which is Upspeak as the knowledge management system, to a lot of people have been talking. It probably came out the closest in your analysis just now, that there is a gap for this creators platform where knowledge creation or content creation has too much emphasis on quick creation, linear flow, and so on. How can we bring in complexity, capturing thought processes to broadcast to audience engagement? I'm kind of combining Upspeak and Xplex in my head at this point.
Hmm.
I am no longer seeing those things as separate
Disconnected. Yeah.
units,
Yeah.
but basically a plumbing layer that again connects these things. And if we build outside in, which is we start with the videos, we learn the audience engagement and build from there, this will come up to, with the knowledge management and these principles in place, I see the following possible, hypothetically. There are discussions. From the discussions just like this, whether we stream or not, I can see a complete cycle, basically a very forward looking, what's that called, progressive loop. No, what is the loop that
Future
adds
facing.
value?
I don't know.
Positive feedback loop.
Oh, positive
Yeah.
feedback. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm seeing a positive feedback loop possible, that you start with this broadcast, you get incrementally better, you narrow down your topics, but these things being taken, the contents grouped into, say, a wiki, which go on to inform certain other discussions that others can participate, parallel forks of this conversation with parallel things other people doing, which can be merged, the synthesis
Mm-hmm.
of the idea,
Mm-hmm.
where each contribution can be traced back to its origin story.
Right.
That basically community as part of your subscription. So how do we bring, you remember that was a problem statement to solve with Kong, that how do you bring people who are listeners onto the platform without disturbing the flow, is still a very interesting problem to solve here.
Yep.
But I am now saying, instead of that just being a real time problem, I want to make it a semantic problem.
Hmm.
I want to make it a very, well, deontological problem.
Yeah, you are deontological. I realize that. I am
I
not
say,
moving from my
but no.
constitutionalism. Yeah.
I'm just saying that when I said deontological, I paused because I was like, okay, there is a option to make it ontological, deontological, whichever direction you want to go. Views on top of a query. But I'm seeing this potentially building not just a knowledge management system, but an alternative social media of, when I say social media, I mean socializing part of it through these narrow confines, the boundaries, which help build and maintain communities and becomes the knowledge base for future generations in certain archival formats.
My thought, I only thing that I'll add is that in our journey, we will find a lot of people who would be better positioned in taking care of the parts or aspects of some
Yes,
things. We
yes,
need to have these things in our mind in order to be able to, like, yes, we thought about this. Would you like to? The delegation part has to happen because
yeah,
there's only a limited things amount of things that you can do it right. Think about from the
yeah,
Rust perspective as well. the
yeah,
the adaptation will have to happen, and if we are having the community support right, like, in the right way, then the momentum would not stop. We just need
yep,
to make sure the very minimal set of ground rules or baselines that we establish, the platform that we create, that is in well enough order,
yep,
so that we don't have to keep on creating the patch rules in order to like keep the system sane, which is a definitive indication of a bad system when you have lots of band-aid fixes, right?
Yep.
So let's focus on the core aspects of things and keep on sowing the seeds. That's the one
Yep.
important aspect that I want to talk about, is that we have sown a lot of seeds. None of those things I see as actually a failure. I think that even if they do not come materialize, the learning from them itself is a something. But I also do think there are options or ways to rematerialize them in a larger cohesive system where all those things integrate into a much bigger, much larger of a platform. And
Yep.
all those things actually do matter.
So basically, what that means is we are talking of doing the things that we do best. Answer one potential answer to your question on session one: what is worth doing? For us, in our context, what is worth doing is be the protocol people, is be the foundational principles people, is be the people who build the adapter system, is
Yes.
be the people who build ways to build the RFCs.
Yes.
We don't need to write the RFCs.
No.
We need to provide the basic guarantees, identify those basic guarantees that such a system has, and exhibit it to a certain extent
Right.
through some early implementations. The implementations would change, but to identify the boundaries of such a system, and again, the things we understand best is how do thinkers think together, how to make thinkers think together. And I think that is
How
the
to
place to
make them
focus on.
interested? How to
How
make
to
them
make them, yeah.
interested?
And I think that is the focus we should keep, which means if the output of anthropic inertia are these videos, a set of research papers or articles or blog posts at its simplest. Let's say a blog post, let's start with simpler, with a set of documents that we prepare on how a potential community can form around this. Two, as a software provider or yeah, let me narrow down the scope, software provider that provides certain code libraries to build systems on top of
Hmm.
them. I do think we understand dev tools so well. We can reason about dev tools so well that we don't need to reason about application level building.
So let that part be our topic of next discussion, and I'll
Yeah.
abstract it out in a sense. Think there is a very interesting or curious case of gravity and magnetism in a certain way.
Yep.
I'll
Yep.
explain why.
Hey, before you go, I just wanted to check: was this a yes or no? I
Which one?
kind of got
The last
like
part?
that. This
Yeah, yeah,
direction,
yeah,
like
yeah.
about
So
what?
yeah, I'm just saying that we don't need to jump the gun. We need to start the platform, but I agree that we need to be the RF, like the protocol people who sets the ground rules and ponders upon like whether that ground rule is set well enough or not. So and interest, that's the reason I'm extending part of the discussion in the next session, not disagreeing, but in order to enrich that with enough point. I just don't think I should go into that discussion right now. I'll end up exhausting myself. I'm pretty giddy, by the way. Like if you don't, if you're not seeing, I don't know how it's coming along, but I'm like very giddy inside, like that. It gives me like when I came out I had lower energy state than I'm going out with. So anyways, so I think with that part also we discussed before. Point is, how do we become the magnets or the black holes where more matter fits in? I'm not gonna I am not gonna expand more on that today, as a matter of principle for the time being, because yes, let's continue that on later. I do I do agree on most of like almost all the things that you said. I just don't think we need to start with that, like having the expectations too
Hey,
much.
I'm not certain about the order of
Yeah,
things
yeah, yeah.
either,
So because
but I'm just
that's
saying that those were instances. That's
yes,
what we
yes,
can do.
yes. Yes on all those accords, right? I just don't think that expectations need to be the driving principle, because that's what ends up being the dopamine feeders essentially. You need to have a dopamine blocker in a sense that we should not live on the uh, high, essentially ride on the high. We should utilize that but not ride on it, because anyways, longer discussion again. Coming back to the point, I think we need to section our discussion in particular parts, And I think one part should be for the next couple of weeks or next couple of months should be that how does the platform ends up forming? What are the things that are in the should be in the to-do list, and how do we approach this? Because that is gonna be a massive or major part. By December, we need to have the platform ready so that we can start promoting it out and have a reveal on the New Year's kind of way.
I think that sounds bloody good. And yeah, I'm like pulling my handbrake and pushing the brake at the
Yes,
same time very,
yes,
very hard.
yes, 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 yes.
It's time to slow down.
Yeah,
But
accelerator and brake at the same time.
no, I've left acceleration. I'm just braking. It's a momentum carrying me onto
Yeah.
the next. Uh, but I think this is good. Mm, just make a note of that topic. I think that's worth doing things. I'm not sure how much time I'll get in the week, but yeah, next session we can definitely focus that,
Yeah,
focus on
the
that.
only reason for me to like bring out all those topics and put it in front of you is that so that it goes into your subconscious. When you are not
So
thinking about anything
basically,
else, this is something that can pop up.
what made me pull my handbrake so hard is that is exactly where I had started my discussions with you few weeks back, with that in mind that I want to reach that stage. So I think like it is converging up to
It was always
on.
gonna go that way. Like I never had a doubt
Yeah,
that
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not. It's just that we need to be very meticulous about it. We can't. So we can't act on a dopamine hit. Essentially, that's my point. There's nothing wrong with dopamine hit. In fact, we should utilize that, but that should not be the driving element, because if that becomes the driving element, then chasing dopamine hit ends up becoming the actual task we end up doing and not the end result. So basically we need to identify where do we fit in, which you already explained, and I agree with that part, and keep on doing a better job at it, better job at laying down the rail line and not. I know there's a more, it's
So
more fun to do the
I
choo
just want to put
choo,
one
but
constraint.
yeah.
I just want to put one constraint. I think whatever we think has to be thought, has to be evaluated on a larger time scale than we did earlier.
Yeah,
And
agreed. Again,
I
yes.
mean, like, I don't know how long. I don't know if it is like a 10, 12 years. I don't know. But the longest, basically, the longevity of each of those things have to be evaluated and put priority over short term gratification.
Right. And for that matter, we need a set point, right? That jump, set point. So that's the part I was going to connect with
Okay.
the
With
topic
the
that I'm not
next,
going to discuss, like the
on the
magnetism,
next
on the
session.
next
Yeah.
session. Let's
Yeah.
do that, because
Cool.
having a set point is very much important, and having clarity on that is very much
Yeah.
important, right?
Yep.
Yep. All right. Cool. So that's pretty much it for today's session. I'm gonna go ahead and end the stream, and